Today we are going to be finding mode and range. Finding the mode. Mode is the data value that appears most. It is our value that appears most. Our keyword here is most. Mode means the same as most. This is something that you will need to know later, but mode is a measure of central tendency. Central tendency. It tells us about the center of our data. The mode can be found of data that is numerical and data that is not numerical. So you can find the mode of data that has numbers. You can also find the mode of data that does not involve numbers. The mode is most helpful when the data is not numerical. So that means that mode is usually helpful when it involves data that doesn't have numbers involved. So when it's about, let's say, types of flavors of ice cream or yes or no's, things like that. A set of data can have one mode, more than one mode, or no mode. So when we have data that has no mode, you don't write 0. You would never write 0. Never write that. That is a big no-no. You would write no mode. Another option that you could write for this is NA, but you would never write 0 because 0 is a number and 0 could represent a mode in a data set. You would write no mode or NA. A set of data can have no mode when each data item occurs the same number of times. We are going to find the mode of each data set. So if we are given this data set, we have no's and yeses. So let's count our no's. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So our no's equal 4. And let's count our yeses. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Our yes equals 5. Remember, mode equals most. So our mode in this data set is going to equal yes. In this data set, when we are finding mode for numbers, our very first step when finding mode in a numerical data set, our very first step is we need to put the numbers in order from least to greatest. Least to greatest. That is our first step. It makes it much easier to find our mode. So that's what we'll do first. We have a 0, and I cross off as I write my numbers. We have a 4, a 5, 6. Aren't any 7s. We have an 8, another 8, another 8, a 9, a 9. And crossing off just makes me put the numbers in order and make sure I get all the numbers written down. A 10, 10, and another 10. So when we look at our data set, we know there's only 1 0, only 1 4, only 1 5, only 1 6. We have 3 8s, 2 9s, and 3 10s. When looking at this data set, so we have 3 8s, 3 10s. In this case, we have more than one mode. Our mode equals 8 and 10. We have more than one mode in this data set. The next data set, once again, our first step is to put them in order. Okay, so we have 14's our smallest number, then 19, 25, 26, 30, 55. In this data set, well, there's only 114, there's only 119, there's only 125, 126, 130, 155. There isn't any mode. Therefore, we know that we don't have a mode. They all only occur once. This is when we write our mode equals no mode. Remember, we do not write the number 0 because the 0 represents a number, and 0 is not in this data set. So we cannot write 0, we write no mode. Here we have a non-numerical data set. We have red, so we will write red. And how many reds do we have? We have equals 1. We have blue, and we have 1. We have green, we have 1, 2. And we have purple, and that equals 1. We can clearly see that our mode from this data set is going to equal green. This mode, once again, equals the most often that occurs. And green occurs most often because there's 2 greens. The next thing that we are going to do is find the range. A measure of variation is a key word here, is a measure that describes the distribution of a data set. So the other one was a measure of central tendency. This one is a measure of variation. Range is the difference, and we know that difference is a key word for subtraction, between the greatest value and the least value of a data set. So it's the difference, means you need to subtract, between the greatest value and the least value in a data set. Okay, so range is a measure of variation. This you will need to know. Mode was a measure of central tendency, which is center, and range is a measure of variation. That's the variation between your data set, your difference between your numbers, where mode measured your center. To find the range of a data set, you first identify the greatest value and the least value, which is your smallest value. Then, like I said, difference meant to subtract. You then subtract the least value from the greatest value. So big minus small. The range can only be found from a numerical data set because we cannot subtract green from purple or red from blue. That doesn't make sense. I don't know how we would do that. Or yes from no. We can only subtract numbers. We are going to now find the range from some data sets to practice. Once again, in order to do this, our first step is to order our numbers from least to greatest. This will make it very simple for us to find our greatest value and our least value. So we're going to order first. 2, 9, 9, 12, and I'm crossing out as I use my numbers so I don't forget any number. 15, 16, and 20. So in my steps, it told me the first thing I needed to do was find my greatest value, which is 20, minus my smallest value, which is 2. And that would equal 18, which equals my range. Just to see if we can remember from our data set, what would our mode be? Our mode. Which value in this data set occurs the most, or which is our mode? I'll give you a few seconds to see if you can figure that out for yourself. And we have 2 9s. So in this data set, yes, our mode would be 9. Once again, the first thing we need to do is order our data set from least to greatest. Our smallest number in this data set is 35, 54, 80, 90, 100. See, I'm crossing them off to make sure I get all of the numbers. 120. I find the greatest value. I subtract. I find the least value, which is 35. That would always be our first value. And that is going to give me my range. When I subtract 120 minus 35, I am going to get 85. That will give me my range. Let's recall again our mode, which is our most in this data set. I'll give you a couple seconds to look at this to see if you can find the mode. Every single number in this data set occurs once. Therefore, there is no mode. Remember, we do not write 0 because 0 is a numerical data. And we don't put 0 because 0 is not in this data set. We write no mode. Here is another piece of data set. 1, we need to put them in order from least to greatest. I'm crossing off as I write the number 12, 45, 45, 46, 75, 89. I find the greatest value, which will be my last one. I'm subtracting because I'm finding the difference. I find the smallest or the least value, which will be our first one, which is 12. And that is going to give me a value of 77, which is going to equal my range. I will give you a few moments again to find our mode, just to recall from earlier. In this data set, if you found 45 as your mode, you are correct because 45 is listed twice in this data set, and that is the only number listed twice. Every other number is listed once. This is our last data set that we are going to practice. First we need to order our values. We have 11, 11, 12, 12. As you see, I'm crossing them off as I write them. 22, 37, 37. I circle the greatest value, which is 37. I am subtracting because I'm finding the difference. Find the least value, which is our first one, which is 11. And when I subtract those numbers from each other, I should get 26, and that will give me my range. Let's review from earlier and see if we can find our mode. In this data set, we have more than one mode. We have 2 11s, 2 12s, and 2 37s. So we have 3 modes in this data set. 11, 12, and 37 are the modes for this data set. The next thing that you are going to do is you are going to go to your classwork under statistics, and you are going to do the Google form on mode and range. If you need to look back at this video, you may do so. Good luck.